works out that way. You're right. Right, well, I make it 2 o'clock, so we'll make a start. So, welcome to the meeting of the Housing Supervisory Board. We're not expecting a fire drill. In the event of the alarm, please leave the building and gather at the front of the building. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Can I ask that all our phones are switched off, and that when you speak for the first time, if you could just introduce yourself in case there's anybody watching online, just for them to be clear. Item 1 is apologies for absence. We've got apologies from Heather Kidd and Roger Evans is substituting, and we've also got apologies from Dan Thomas and Robert Tyndall. Item 2 is disclose for pecuniary interest. Is there anybody that needs to declare anything? No? Okay. Item 3 is the minutes, and we're to confirm the minutes from the meeting held on the 8th of July. Are we happy with those? Record. Lisa's moved. Have a seconder. Simon, thank you. Item 4 is public question time, and we haven't received any. Item 5 is member question time, and we haven't received any. So that moves us swiftly on to item 6, which is the appointment of Chair of Board of Directors. There has been a report circulated, but I will hand over to Jane just to introduce that.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report informs Housing Supervisory Board of the appointment of a new chair to Cornwall Developments Limited Board, and that is Derek Humphreys, who's been on the board since July of 2020. A competitive interview process was conducted in September, and Derek was selected as a preferred candidate, and he has a great deal of experience within the development and construction sector, which is highly relevant for the role of chair of the board. This change of chair has come about following the Campbell to Kell report on governance, which advised that having the same person holding 2 high positions at non-executive and executive director levels was not ideal. And so, especially as CDL is now at the delivery stage, actually building on site and moving to grow its business even further, it was important to have the function of the managing director clearly defined, with any perception of conflict of interest removed. So, on that basis, Harpreet has been replaced by Derek. Derek was selected as a preferred candidate for the role, and his appointment has been approved by all serving CDL Cornwall Development Limited board members. It is for CDL's board under their Articles of Association to appoint the chair, subject to the power of the shareholder, which is the council, to give the directors notice to terminate the chair's appointment at some point should that be required. I'll leave that there. Okay.
Right. As you can see, there's no recommendations within the report, but it is for noting. But has anybody got any questions? Roger?
Is the chair invited to these meetings of the supervisory board? Would they normally be expected to attend?
Jane, no, that's you.
No, is the answer to that. No, the chair of the board of Cornwall's board is not required to attend the Housing Supervisory Board, and that's not a normal expectation. It's not within the terms of reference of the Housing Supervisory Board to have the chair come, though the board could choose to invite them from time to time if preferred.
Okay.
Could I suggest, and I know I'm only here temporarily, but could I ask that the chair is automatically invited here, because there may be some questions that we would want to ask those in the future, whether the chair comes or not, okay, but I would have thought it would be good to have them hear any discussions that we have firsthand.
I think, Jane, just take it. Would it be worth extending a standing invitation, but not in expectation, particularly that they attend? Is that something we could do?
Absolutely, yes, no problem.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Anybody got anything else they want to ask on that one? No? Vince?
I want to say that obviously the regular full-time board members met him at the away day, Roger. So we have met him, but I would imagine most questions could be answered by Harpreet as the managing director and former chairman. Having said that, there's no issue with inviting him, providing he understands he doesn't need to necessarily do it unless he's advised that there will be a question for him.
Okay, I think we're all in agreement on that one. Okay, so are we happy to note the report that's put to us? Yeah. Okay. Right, that moves us on to item 7, which is the Cornovi update report. So, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. So this updates the progress of Cornovi against its approved 5-year business plan and provides an analysis of the housing market and the challenges that the sector is experiencing at the moment as well, and detail on the development of the Frith and Ellesmere Wharf, which are the 2 schemes that are currently on site for Cornovi. In terms of the climate change appraisal for the developments in hand, Frith Close, all the units have an energy performance certificate rating of A, and Ellesmere of B. The difference between the 2 links to the abnormal costs at Ellesmere Wharf, which are quite significant. It is a brownfield site and actually a great deal of costs associated with it, which means that it would be unviable to increase the performance of the homes at Ellesmere further than an EPC level B. The 5-year development programme was fixed at 574 new homes. To note that this is now being reduced to 532 new homes at the moment. This is due to 2 sites that were in the pipeline no longer proceeding. This is to some extent inevitable that there will be some variation from time to time in terms of the schemes that are in the programme, and Cornovi is continuing to look for future opportunities for growth and future sites as well, and that will be across the county. Appendix A to this report provides some greater detail from the Managing Director of CDL. I'd like to invite Harpreet to speak in terms of that appendix.
Harpreet Grant, the Managing Director of Cornovi Development. If I can just start off with a general overview of the market at the moment, we're still seeing robust growth within the housing market, with a lot of people still very much interested in properties. We were concerned at the end of the stamp duty holiday that we may see a fall, but due to a lack of new supply on the market, we're still seeing quite a number of inquiries in terms of properties that we have available. One of the bigger challenges for us at this point is around the supply of materials and labour, which is sized across various media outlets, and we're finding that I think quite a complex issue for the company and our contracting partners as well. So many of the suppliers that we've historically worked with or are planning to work with are unable to freeze their prices for an extended period. We normally assume up to 13 weeks before an order has to be placed. We're seeing some organisations asking us to place an order within a 4-week period, which is kind of unheard of within the building industry because of the inflationary pressures. In terms of the general development summary, we're on site for 2 sites, which Jane has already mentioned, and we are currently out to tender for another site that recently received planning consent over at St Martin's, and we're expecting those tenders back tomorrow, which will give us a real gauge of how much the construction industry has moved, and also the general view of contracting partners in terms of risk. And in terms of the social value element of the programme, we continue to support local contractors. Currently within the Frith, 100% of our supply chain, and the majority of our employees are based within a Shropshire postcode. Within Ellesmere Wharf, because we've been doing a lot of remediation, it's a lot less, about 30%. But as we start constructing those properties, we're expecting that to potentially increase as well going forward. We continue to undertake work with many of our partners around apprenticeships. So on site at the moment at the Frith, we have 4 apprenticeships, and we're expecting a similar number going forward. at Ellesmere once we come out of the ground and start constructing those units. And I think that's everything for the report in a nutshell. Happy to take questions.
Okay, come to Jeff first.
So can you explain the problems you've been having at Ellesmere then? You said remediation work.
Yeah. So the site was a former dairy site. So what we have found underneath the site is gas mains, gas pipes that we've had to remove. We've found buried asbestos. We've found concrete bollards. We found a road we didn't know existed. The list goes on and on. So we have undertaken a lot of surveys before we started work, so we were aware of some of these issues. But as with everything, once you start digging and identifying what's actually happened, you find a few more issues. So in essence, our programme has gone back by about 4 weeks because of the various additional remediation issues that we found on that site. I think that's one of the key challenges associated with brownfield development, and that you'll have a view based on the surveys that have been produced, but until you start digging, there's normally a lot more risky items unfortunately underneath the ground. However, we have nearly completed that remediation now. We are looking at putting the foundations in. We have actually put in place as well our attenuation tanks as well. So we have progressed over the most difficult part of that particular site, which we're very happy with.
I think it's very disappointing that because of those remediation costs, and we knew, I think when we looked at that site in the first instance, it was always going to be a difficult site to develop, that we've taken a view that we're not going to provide those homes with solar panels. I think that is disappointing. That I'm sure there must have been other potential savings we could have made in the development of those properties without having to take that decision. Because my view is, over the coming years, probably past 2025 or sometime, we'll be having to retrofit solar panels onto these properties and the like. And so I think that I would have liked it if we could have found some other means of making these properties viable without the removal of the solar panels.
I agree. We all want to install more renewable technologies on all our properties. We had to make a call on that site because of the difficult remediation issues associated with the site, and also around the approach we took to the build. So we've gone with the fabric first approach, which makes the properties at least 21% above existing building regulation standards in terms of thermal efficiency of the properties. And then we decided to put a heat recovery system in there as well. Again, with a real focus on lowering gas bills and making sure people don't have to use as much heating. And so we had to make a decision whether we go with the heat recovery system or the solar panels. And given how insulated the properties were, we decided to go down that route, but no, completely agree. Our preference would have been to install everything like we did at the roof. But unfortunately, it's because the site's been empty for such a long period and we found so many risky items there that it's just not been possible.
Okay, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Echoing the similar thoughts about the solar panels and the carbon effect that it will have at Ellesmere, I'm disappointed that we're not. I note elsewhere in the report that house prices have been increased by 11%, so it still need to be in affordable homes, etc. But do we have any powers to actually recommend that Carnovi actually revisit to look at this about putting the panels on? Because if we are building homes, Shropshire Council via Carnovi are building homes, and we're setting this precedent out, then any private housing building company, we would have no leg to stand on, and we do not set a good example with us not doing it. I also note that there's no remediation on either of the two sites which I mentioned as carbon offset. So even the Frith one has a generation of carbon dioxide, CO2, but we have not gone for zero net CO2 on that, i.e. put in landscaping, trees or whatever to ameliorate the CO2. And it's something that will be built up in the future if we want to go for net zero carbon. This council has adopted an attitude of climate emergency, but here we are putting buildings up on a site which will generate CO2, and because of cost we're not doing it. I really think this should be revisited, and panels should be put on to reduce their carbon footprint even more than what it is now. If it was a private company, I think I would be trying to exert pressure on that company to actually do it, and we should be doing the same with Conovi. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. I think in terms of the question about do we have the power to, I'm going to look at officers. I don't think.
We don't have the power to direct Conovi to make a particular change to a site. Conovi is an independent company. We are the shareholder and it is solely owned by the council, but it is responsive to its board of directors who have to make decisions about the business planning and the business case for each individual site. So our interest is as the shareholder looking at the investment that we're making in the company. That said, Conovi has been set up to meet expectations of the council when it was first formed, and it's worth noting that the units that are being delivered, the developments that are happening through Conovi, are a step above what the rest of the market is offering, and it is inevitable to some extent that site by site you will get variations in the cost of the development depending on what you find. Under the ground, often, as Harpreet has described, things that you were not aware of at the outset. So I think in all cases with Conovi, we would expect that their first position is that they will try to absolutely maximise what they can do in terms of low carbon, but there just will inevitably be a certain amount of adaptation to what they find on the ground each time. So there's no harm in asking them to review and revisit and to set out the Housing Supervisory Board's position on this. However, we can't instruct them to vary on a site-by-site basis.
Okay, I think the point I would make is obviously Conovi has been set up to meet the housing needs, so it's trying to balance the priorities of the council as well. So in that regard, I think that personally the explanation has been given as to they've looked at each of the options, chosen which are the ones they're putting in and so on. I think that we are hearing that balance within their approach, but I'm happy to take any further comments. I think I'll come back to Roger and then I'll come to Vince.
I think we need to be a bit careful.
I don't think
Yeah, I'm here. I think we need to be a bit careful that we're not being too harsh. I think aspirationally we'd love them to be zero carbon. But I think, some of the stuff that it says in the report, particularly around the Frith, where it's, your average house EPC rated produces 3.2, and they've got it down to 0.34, which is 2.86 tonnes less. I think is pretty good going. I think you have made the point. I mean, that at the end of the day, this is about trying to provide cost-effective housing, in Shropshire, and I think they're doing a long way to it. Yeah, of course, I'm disappointed that we're not going to get solar panels on the roofs, but I also understand when you start digging holes and coming up with roads and asbestos, that the number crunching has to be redone. I just want to say I think actually you're doing a pretty good job at the moment. I guess if I had to ask one question, it would be, is there any way when you get new sites that you can do more core testing to see what's below your feet, so that we don't end up in this going forward? I mean, this one is what it is. What lessons have you learned from this particular site, and going forward, how would you be able to ensure that we're not having this conversation again? Because I know you can't be 100%, and I know you do due diligence, but can that due diligence be improved on, to make sure that what's under your feet is not going to stop things like solar panels in the future?
I think that's a fair question. It should be noted that we purchased this site from the council. There was a lot of work, surveys undertaken. We then updated all of those surveys and did them all again before we started on site. And even at that point, we did a number of core holes as well. And We also thought there was potentially a brook running underneath as well, a site which wasn't there. The level of due diligence that we undertook was quite substantial. I think where we probably missed the trick was at the corner of the site where there wasn't a factory or any sort of idea of any sort of construction being placed there. We didn't do a borehole there, and the reason for that was none of the plans made us assume that something would be placed there, but what we didn't expect was for large pillars in excellence being buried there from the previous contract. I think that's where we probably missed the trick. But in terms of the level of due diligence, I don't think we could have done any more given the amount of information, that was available to us at the time.
Okay, thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Two things I would like to propose at this committee today. Ask Kenobi to revisit this and look at our aspirations for the solar panels, and we are disappointed about the carbon for the Ellesmere Wharf site especially. Look at the amelioration of reducing further the CO2, but I also do not understand in 6.4 of this report when it says unviable. What does this mean? It means that it would be a loss if we did it, or it wouldn't break even, or it doesn't give the return that is required. It's very involved in it. The word just says unviable, and I'm not sure what that word means in the context of the Ellesmere Wharf development.
Okay, so I got it. So your proposal is to revisit the solar panel decision on the Ellesmere side.
Asking Kenobi to actually revisit the solar panel, and also if there's any means of extra landscaping to reduce the CO2 even further. And then separate to that, I'm asking the question, what does unviable mean in 6.4 of this report?
Okay, well, I'm guessing you'll be able to pick up the unviable part. Should we do that first?
Of course, yeah. Under the funding agreement from the council, we have to demonstrate a return to the council. So all of our schemes that we take forward have to make a financial return. If we were to increase the specification on this particular site, we would not have made that return. And so that's why it's considered unviable.
If I can, Chairman, I note that in 8.2 of the report, it says that CDL is monitored by the Council's Home and Communities team. I would suggest that maybe go back to those to see that on this particular site, it isn't possible to give the expected return to the council, and we're the shareholders. Then it may well be acceptable that it doesn't reach the terms that we set if we can get solar panels in place, because that is what the council policy is, climate emergency, and we should be doing everything in our power to actually reduce the generation of carbon. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, have you got a seconder for your proposal? So it was a proposal to revisit, ask Kenobi to revisit the solar panel decision on their Ellesmere Wharf site, and consider any means of extra landscaping to reduce emissions further.
I accept that.
Okay. Secondly, okay. Right, can all those in favour indicate? 4, okay. So that carries. So we will arrange for that to go to the Kenobi board just to make that request. Okay. Thank you, Jane. Has anybody got any other questions on the report? Yeah, Vince.
I suppose really the only obvious one that jumps out at me is obviously this is a B-rated one, and if you were minded to put the solar panels in, it would drop below the expected return that the council has set. Is it possible on the next development to exceed the council's expectations? Is it done site by site, or is it done on housing development per year? Are you able to cross-pollinate between developments?
No.
That's a shame.
So we look at things on an individual site basis. But the risk for us is that if we had some winners and losers, let's describe it that way, but the number of winners didn't come in, then it would create a financial hole which would end up us reporting the loss to the shareholder, which we're just not able to do, and also not being able to finance our funding either, because we're 100% debt funded, you see. So then we wouldn't be able to pay back our loans. So we have to do each scheme on its own merit, unfortunately.
Okay. Yep, Roger.
Can I note the word loss? We're talking about reaching the percentage return that the council has set. There may well be, we can reach to equilibrium, and that would give some headroom. So I'm not talking about a loss or anything like this. I'm talking about the return that has been set by the council for any investment. And there is a return, both financial and CO2, really. I'm not talking about making any loss. I'm talking about reducing the return that is expected from this investment.
That's good.
The current process is that each development appraisal is considered by the council. It's the only way that we're able to draw down money, so it's in the council's gift to take a view on a scheme by scheme basis. However, we have had some parameters set out to us by our funder, which is in essence the finance department, and that's what we try and work towards.
My last comment,
Yeah,
Chairman,
I was going to say.
I will be tackling this in the exec session, but I can't bring it up now because there are some information in the exec session which I may well refer to later on.
Yep. That's fine. Somebody's obviously emailing everybody in the room, so we should have a bit of silencing laptops as well on the line. So, okay, right. I think that deals with that item. If everybody's happy, we'll note the recommendation is to note the update, which I think we'll do, and then there's obviously one action and follow up to Kempro's as well. So. Okay, we'll move on to item 8, which is exclusion of the press and public, to resolve in accordance with the provisions of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 and paragraph 10.4 of the Council's access to information, that the press and public be excluded during consideration of the following item. Are we happy to move that? Yes? Okay. Shelley, I'll wait for your nod. We're not live anymore.